What if your entire life was controlled by one idea war? Not training for it, not preparing for it, but living every single day as if battle was your only purpose. This was Sparta, one of the most extreme societies in human history, where everything, from birth to death, was designed to create the perfect soldier. Unlike Athens, which valued philosophy and art, Sparta rejected comfort. It focused on discipline, obedience, and absolute strength. But the story of Sparta doesn't begin on the battlefield. It begins at birth, where survival was not guaranteed. Newborn boys were examined by elders. If they were considered weak, they were abandoned. In Sparta, strength was not a goal, it was a requirement. Those who survived this first test entered a life that would be harder than almost anything in the ancient world. At the age of 7, boys were taken from their families and placed into the agoge, a system designed to break them down and rebuild them as soldiers. From that moment on, their identity changed. They no longer belonged to their families, they belonged to Sparta. They were trained to endure pain without reaction, to survive hunger, to remain silent, to become controlled, disciplined, and dangerous. Food was limited on purpose. Boys were encouraged to steal, but punished if they failed to do it properly. As the years passed, the training became even harsher. Boys were pushed to their limits every day, constantly tested in strength, endurance, and discipline. They fought each other in controlled combat, learning how to win, how to endure pain, and how to stay calm under pressure. Every mistake was punished. Every weakness was exposed. The goal was simple: remove fear, remove hesitation, remove individuality. They learned to move as one unit, to trust the soldier beside them, and to never break formation under any circumstances. Because in Sparta, one weak soldier could destroy an entire line, and that was unacceptable. By adulthood, Spartan men were no longer individuals. They were part of a system built entirely for war. They lived together, trained together, and fought together, forming one of the most disciplined military forces in history. Even marriage did not change their life. Spartan men continued to live in military groups for most of their lives. Their identity was not personal, it was collective. They were Spartans first, everything else came second. And their greatest weapon was not strength, it was discipline. In 480 BC, Sparta faced its greatest challenge, the invasion of Greece by the Persian Empire. The Persian king Xerxes led one of the largest armies the world had ever seen. Against this force, the Greek city-state stood divided and unprepared. But there was one place where numbers would not matter. A narrow pass called Thermopylae. King Leonidas led a small force to block the Persian advance at this critical location. Among them were 300 Spartans, highly trained, disciplined, and ready to face overwhelming odds. They were joined by several thousand Greek allies, all preparing for what could be their final stand. The Persian army arrived in massive numbers, stretching across the land. But the narrow terrain changed everything. Only a small number of soldiers could fight at once. This removed the Persian advantage and gave the Spartans exactly what they needed. The battle began with a simple expectation. The Persians believed they would quickly overwhelm the small Greek force and continue their advance without delay. But when the first wave attacked, they met something different, a perfectly organized Spartan formation that did not break under pressure. Shields locked together, spears extended forward. The Spartans moved as one unit, creating a wall that was almost impossible to penetrate. The narrow pass forced the Persian army to attack in smaller groups, neutralizing their overwhelming numerical advantage. Wave after wave of Persian soldiers attacked, but each time, they were pushed back by discipline and coordination. Even the elite Persian immortals, considered one of the most powerful units in the empire, failed to break the Spartan line. Day after day, the Spartans held their ground, turning what should have been a quick victory into a prolonged and costly battle. The Persian army began to suffer heavy losses, and frustration started to grow among their commanders. But the Spartans were not trying to win. Their goal was to delay, to hold the line as long as possible. Every hour they held the pass gave the rest of Greece time to prepare for the larger war. For a moment, it seemed like the Spartans might achieve the impossible, but then a local man named Ephialtes made a decision that would change everything. He revealed a hidden mountain path that allowed the Persian army to move around the Spartan position. The Spartans were about to be surrounded from both sides. When Leonidas learned about the betrayal, he understood the situation immediately. The battle could no longer be won. The only question left was how it would end. Leonidas made a choice. He dismissed most of the Greek allies to save their lives. But the Spartans remained. They chose to stay and fight. For them, retreat was not an option. It never had been. This was not just a battle anymore. It was a final stand. At dawn, the final battle began. The Persian army attacked from both directions, closing in on the remaining Spartan forces. The Spartans tightened their formation, preparing for a fight they knew they would not survive. They fought with the same discipline as before, precise, controlled, and relentless. Even as the situation became hopeless, they did not break formation. Spears broke, shields shattered, but the fighting continued. When their weapons failed, they used whatever they had: swords, fists, even stones. King Leonidas fell in battle, surrounded by his men. The Spartans fought to protect his body, refusing to let it fall into enemy hands. One by one, they were overwhelmed, but they never surrendered. By the end, the entire Spartan force had fallen. The pass was taken. The battle was lost. But something else had been achieved. The Spartans had delayed one of the largest armies in the world. They had shown that discipline could stand against overwhelming numbers, and they had given Greece time to prepare. Their sacrifice became a symbol across the entire Greek world. It changed how the war was fought and how it would be remembered. Thermopylae became more than a defeat. It became a story of resistance, discipline, and absolute commitment. A story that would be told for thousands of years. News of the battle spread across Greece. What happened at Thermopylae was no longer just a military event, it became a powerful symbol. The idea that a small force could resist a massive empire inspired other Greek city-states to continue fighting. Sparta's discipline became legendary, not because they won, but because they refused to break. Their story spread far beyond Greece, shaping how future generations would understand courage and sacrifice. But Sparta itself was more than just Thermopylae. Its entire society was built on control, discipline, and military power. Spartan women were also trained differently from the rest of Greece. Encouraged to be strong, independent, and physically capable, they were expected to raise strong children and support the warrior culture of the state. The famous phrase given to Spartan warriors was simple: "Return with your shield, or on it." This meant victory or death. There was no third option. But despite their strength, Sparta was not invincible. Over time, their rigid system began to limit them instead of strengthening them. Other Greek city-states adapted, evolved, and changed while Sparta remained the same. Eventually, Sparta faced defeat not because it lacked strength, but because it could not adapt. Its military dominance faded, and its influence slowly disappeared from history. But the idea of Sparta did not disappear. It remained as a symbol of discipline, strength, and absolute commitment. Even today, the word Spartan still represents endurance and toughness. Their story continues to influence how we think about strength and sacrifice. Because Sparta was never just a place, it was an idea. After Thermopylae, the war continued. The Persian army kept advancing, burning cities and pushing deeper into Greece. But something had changed. The Greeks were no longer afraid. They had seen the Persians could be resisted. That belief shaped the war. At Salamis, the Greek navy struck back and defeated the Persian fleet. At Plataea, the Greek army pushed the Persians out of Greece entirely, turning the war around, and it all traced back to one moment, a stand at a narrow pass called Thermopylae. Sparta lost the battle, but changed the course of the war. That is why Thermopylae is remembered not as a victory, but as a statement. A statement about discipline, sacrifice, and refusing to break under impossible pressure. Because that is what made Sparta different, not just how they fought, but how they lived, and how they chose to die. Even now, thousands of years later, their story remains. Not because they were perfect, but because they were extreme. They pushed discipline further than almost any society in history, and that is why we still talk about them today. Because Sparta was never just a place, it was an idea.